On September 19, 1940, in the Żoliborz district of Warsaw, a 39-year-old Polish cavalry officer named Witold Pilecki stood in his sister-in-law's apartment and watched German soldiers conduct a street roundup outside. The Łapanka, a random sweep, where the Nazis grabbed Polish civilians off the streets, usually for forced labor or execution. Witold could have hidden. There was a concealed space in the apartment where dozens of Poles had successfully evaded capture. His family begged him to hide. His wife Maria had pleaded with him days earlier. His two young children, Andrzej and Zofia, needed their father. He refused. Instead, he straightened his jacket, kissed his sister-in-law goodbye, and walked outside. He joined the line of terrified civilians being rounded up at gunpoint. He let the Germans arrest him. This wasn't stupidity. This wasn't surrender. This was the beginning of the most audacious infiltration mission of the Second World War. Because Witold Pilecki wasn't trying to escape the Nazis. He was trying to get captured and sent to a place so terrible that even hardened SS officers spoke of it in whispers. A new concentration camp that had opened 3 months earlier in the small Polish town of Auschwitz. Its German name was Konzentrationslager Auschwitz. The world would come to know it simply as Auschwitz. Pilecki's mission was simple to state and impossible to execute. Get arrested, get sent to Auschwitz, build a resistance network inside the camp, gather intelligence about what the Nazis were doing, send reports to the outside world, and if possible, organize an uprising to liberate the camp. For 2.5 years, using the alias Tomasz Serafiński, prisoner number 4859, Witold Pilecki would live in Auschwitz. He would organize hundreds of inmates into a secret resistance cell. He would smuggle out the first eyewitness reports of the Holocaust. And he would prove that even in humanity's darkest hour, even in a place designed to break the human spirit, resistance was possible. The story doesn't begin with heroism. It begins on a rural estate in eastern Poland. Witold Pilecki was born on May 13, 1901, in Oluniec, Karelia, deep in the Russian Empire. His family were members of the Polish landed gentry, but they had been exiled to Russia for supporting Polish independence movements. When Witold was 6, his family returned to Poland and settled on an estate near Lida, in what is now Belarus. It was a good life. The Pileckis owned farmland. They had workers. Young Witold grew up riding horses, hunting, and learning estate management. He attended good schools. He learned Russian, Polish, German, and French. He was educated, cultured, privileged, but he was also a patriot. In 1918, when Poland regained independence after 123 years of partition, 17-year-old Witold joined the Polish army. He fought in the Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1921, which secured Poland's eastern borders. He participated in the decisive Battle of Warsaw in August 1920, where Polish forces stopped the Red Army's advance into Europe. After the war, Pilecki attended officer training school. He became a cavalry officer, a Rotmisters, equivalent to a captain. He married Maria Ostrowska in 1931. They had 2 children, Andrzej and Zofia. Pilecki settled into civilian life, managing his family's estate, raising his children, living the life of a country gentleman. He had served his country. He had done his duty. He thought his war was over. He was wrong. On September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland from the west. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. Poland was caught in a vice between two totalitarian empires. The Polish army fought desperately, but was overwhelmed. By October 6, 1939, organized Polish resistance had collapsed. The country was divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. Pilecki's estate fell on the Soviet side. He and his family fled west to Warsaw, which was under German occupation. Everything they owned was lost. But Pilecki didn't surrender. On November 9, 1939, just weeks after Poland's defeat, Pilecki and his commander, Major Jan Włodarkiewicz, founded the Tajna Armia Polska, the secret Polish army. It was one of the first resistance organizations in occupied Poland. They gathered weapons, recruited members, planned sabotage operations, prepared for the day Poland would rise again. By summer 1940, the resistance had intelligence that the Germans were deporting thousands of Poles to a new camp near the town of Auschwitz, which the Germans called Auschwitz. Rumors suggested it was a place of shocking brutality. Prisoners were dying in large numbers, but nobody knew exactly what was happening inside. The Polish resistance needed someone on the ground to find out. In August 1940, Major Włodarkiewicz called a meeting. He looked directly at Witold Pilecki and proposed a mission. Someone needed to infiltrate Auschwitz, gather intelligence, organize the prisoners, find out what the Germans were doing. It wasn't an order. It was an invitation to volunteer. Pilecki understood immediately that this was a one-way ticket. Getting into Auschwitz was easy. Getting out alive was nearly impossible. The survival rate was measured in weeks. He had a wife, 2 young children who needed their father, a resistance organization that needed his leadership. Every rational calculation said to refuse. Pilecki agreed immediately. He later explained his reasoning simply. Someone had to do it, and I was in a position to do it. This is the piano wire moment. The fatal flaw in the Nazi system was that Auschwitz was invisible. The world didn't know what was happening inside. The Nazis could do anything behind those walls because nobody was watching. Pilecki's innovation was to become the eyes inside, to transform himself from a Polish officer into a nameless prisoner who could see everything and report it all. On September 19, 1940, Pilecki was given forged identity papers in the name of Tomasz Serafiński. He was listed as a painter and decorator from Warsaw, born in 1902. He memorized the false identity, every detail, his fictional childhood, his made-up work history, the names of people who didn't exist. Then he went to his sister-in-law's apartment and waited for the łapanka. When the German soldiers began rounding up civilians, Pilecki walked outside. He was arrested along with about 2,000 other Poles. They were taken to the Lichterhorst barracks in Warsaw. For 2 days, prisoners were beaten with rubber batons. Men who protested were shot. Pilecki stayed quiet, kept his head down, acted like a frightened civilian. He watched. He observed. He memorized the faces of the SS guards, the procedures, the systems. He was already gathering intelligence. On September 21st, the prisoners were loaded onto trucks and trains. Pilecki didn't know for certain where they were going. But when the train arrived at Auschwitz station on September 22, 1940, he knew his mission had begun. What Pilecki saw when he entered Auschwitz wasn't hell yet. It was hell becoming. In September 1940, Auschwitz wasn't yet the industrialized death factory it would become. It was a brutal concentration camp, but not yet an extermination camp. There were no gas chambers, no selections, no immediate program of mass murder. But it was still a nightmare. Pilecki and 1,704 other prisoners were processed, stripped naked, hair shaved, possessions confiscated. They were beaten continuously during the entire process. SS guards and capos struck prisoners with clubs, fists, and boots. Random constant designed to terrorize. Pilecki later wrote, "Together with 100 other people, I at least reached the bathroom. Here we gave everything away into bags, to which respective numbers were tied. Here our hair of head and body were cut off, and we were slightly sprinkled by cold water. I got a blow in my jaw with a heavy rod. I spat out my 2 teeth. Bleeding began." From that moment, Pilecki later wrote, "We became mere numbers." Pilecki became prisoner number 4,859, a relatively low number. The camp had only been operational for 4 months. He was assigned to slave labor details. He worked in the gravel pits, breaking rocks under the blazing sun. 12 hours a day, no breaks, no water. Guards would shoot prisoners who stopped to rest. He worked in construction, building new barracks as the camp expanded, carrying bricks, mixing concrete. His hands bled, his back screamed, he kept working. He worked in the fields, planting and harvesting. Bent over for hours, his spine feeling like it would snap. The labor was designed to kill. 12-hour days of brutal physical work, minimal food, maybe 700 calories a day, a piece of bread, thin soup with no nutrition, sometimes a bit of margarine or moldy sausage, filthy, overcrowded barracks, no heat in winter, temperatures inside barely above freezing. Prisoners dropped dead from exhaustion, from malnutrition, from beatings by SS guards and capos, prisoner functionaries, who were often more brutal than the Germans. These were prisoners themselves, usually German criminals, who were given positions of power over other prisoners. They used clubs and whips freely. They killed for sport. Men were shot for minor infractions, for walking too slowly, for looking at a guard, for nothing at all. The SS would shoot prisoners randomly to terrorize the others. Public executions at roll call were common. Prisoners would be forced to watch while men were hanged or shot for sabotage or attempted escape. In his first months, Pilecki saw thousands of men die, and he began his work. The mission was to organize a resistance network, but this was almost impossibly difficult. The camp was designed to prevent solidarity. Prisoners came from different countries, spoke different languages. They were starving, exhausted, traumatized. The SS had informers everywhere. Any hint of organization meant death. Pilecki started small. He identified prisoners he could trust, fellow Polish officers who had ended up in Auschwitz, men of character who hadn't been broken. He would approach them carefully. A whispered conversation during work. A quiet exchange in the barracks at night. He told them who he really was, what his mission was, what he needed. By November 1940, Pilecki had organized the core of what would become the Związek Organizacji Wojskowej, the Union of Military Organization, ZOW for short. Building this network was perhaps the most dangerous thing anyone attempted in Auschwitz. The camp was designed to prevent exactly this kind of organization. Prisoners came from different countries. They spoke Polish, German, Czech, Russian, French. Communication was difficult. Everyone was starving, exhausted, brutalized. Trust was nearly impossible. The SS had informers everywhere. Prisoners who would betray others for an extra piece of bread. Capos who would beat fellow prisoners to death to prove their loyalty to the Germans. Any hint of organization, any whisper of resistance, meant immediate execution. Not just for you, but for everyone around you. Collective punishment was standard. If one prisoner was suspected of sabotage, 10 would be shot in reprisal, sometimes more. The SS would line up prisoners and count off. Every 10th man would step forward and be executed. This was designed to make prisoners police themselves, to make solidarity impossible. Pilecki started with men he knew personally, fellow Polish cavalry officers who had ended up in Auschwitz, men whose character he could vouch for. He would approach them during work details when the guards weren't watching closely. A whispered conversation while carrying bricks. A quiet exchange in the barracks at night when exhaustion made the capos less vigilant. He told them who he really was, what his mission was, what he needed from them. The first recruits were men like Colonel Władysław Serafiński, who became one of ZOW's key organizers, Major Zygmunt Pawłowicz, who coordinated intelligence gathering, and Witold Pilecki, who handled communications with civilian contacts outside the camp. These men recruited others, carefully, slowly. Each new member was vetted thoroughly. They would watch a potential recruit for weeks, observe how he behaved under pressure, whether he could be trusted, whether he was really who he claimed to be. The network grew organically, cell by cell. By early 1941, ZOW had over 100 members. By 1942, several hundred. By the time Pilecki escaped in 1943, the network included close to 1,000 prisoners across all the subcamps of Auschwitz. The network served multiple functions, each one critical to survival and resistance. First, morale. This was perhaps the most important. Prisoners in ZOW knew they weren't alone. They were part of something larger than themselves. They had a purpose beyond mere survival. In a place designed to strip away humanity, ZOW gave men back their dignity. They weren't just numbers. They were soldiers in an invisible army. Second, material support. ZOW members worked in various parts of the camp, some in the kitchens, some in the warehouses, some in the hospital. They used these positions to steal food, medicine, and clothing. The items were distributed to ZOW members who were most at risk. A prisoner in the hospital might get extra medicine smuggled by a ZOW member who worked there. A prisoner assigned to a brutal work detail might get extra food to maintain his strength. This mutual aid saved lives. Third, sabotage. This was done carefully, subtly. ZOW members who worked in workshops would sabotage German equipment. A tool would be filed down so it would break after a few uses. Measurements would be slightly off so parts wouldn't fit together. Work would be done slowly, inefficiently. Nothing so obvious it would be traced to a specific prisoner, but enough to cause problems for the SS. Fourth, intelligence gathering. This was the core mission. ZOW members were everywhere in the camp. They saw everything. They would observe and report. A member working at the railway ramp would count how many prisoners arrived each day, what countries they came from, how many were selected for immediate death. A member in the camp records office would copy down statistics, total prisoner numbers, death rates, causes of death. A member who worked near the crematoriums would report how many bodies were burned daily. A member who spoke German would eavesdrop on SS conversations and report what he heard about future plans for the camp. All of this information flowed up through the network to Pilecki, who compiled it into reports. And fifth, communication with the outside world. This was the most dangerous function and the most important. Pilecki identified civilian workers who came into the camp from the town of Auschwitz, Polish civilians who worked as laborers or delivered supplies. These were ordinary people, farmers, tradesmen. They could move in and out of the camp relatively freely because the Germans needed their labor. He would approach them, usually through intermediaries, to protect his identity. The request was simple. "Will you carry a message out?" Most refused. The penalty for helping prisoners was death, not just for you, for your whole family. But some agreed. These incredibly brave Poles would smuggle out messages, written on tiny scraps of paper, hidden in their shoes, sewn into their clothing, tucked inside tools. The messages went to resistance contacts in Auschwitz. From there, they were sent by courier to the underground command in Warsaw. And from Warsaw, they were forwarded through clandestine routes to the Polish government in exile in London. Pilecki's first report left Auschwitz in October 1940, carried out by a released prisoner named Alexander Wielopolski, who memorized Pilecki's verbal account. It described the brutal conditions, the systematic murder of prisoners, the expansion of the camp. More reports followed throughout 1941 and 1942, each one more urgent than the last, because Auschwitz was changing. In September 1941, the SS conducted the first experiments with Zyklon B gas on Soviet prisoners of war in Block 11. Pilecki didn't witness it directly, but ZOW members who worked nearby reported what they heard, screaming that lasted 20 minutes, then silence. In early 1942, everything accelerated. The final solution began. Jewish prisoners started arriving by the trainload from across occupied Europe, thousands per day, tens of thousands per week. The selections began immediately on the railway ramp. SS doctors, including the notorious Joseph Mengele, would point left or right. Left meant immediate death in the gas chambers. Right meant temporary survival as slave labor. Pilecki watched from a distance as trains arrived carrying thousands. Families, children, old people. They were told they were being resettled. They didn't know they were entering a factory of death. Most would be dead within hours. The gas chambers operated day and night. Pilecki documented the process meticulously through his network. The arrival of transports, the deception at the ramp, where prisoners were told they were going to shower and be deloused. The march to the gas chambers disguised as shower facilities. The use of Zyklon B pellets dropped through vents in the ceiling. The time it took to kill everyone inside, approximately 20 minutes. The removal of bodies by the Sonderkommando. Jewish prisoners forced to work in the gas chambers and crematoriums. The extraction of gold teeth from corpses. The burning of bodies. The disposal of ashes in nearby rivers and ponds. By mid-1943, Auschwitz-Birkenau had 4 massive gas chamber and crematorium complexes. Crematoria 2 and 3 could each handle 1,400 bodies per day. Crematoria 4 and 5 could handle 768 each. The SS could murder and cremate up to 4,000 people per day. Pilecki sent all of this in his reports. Exact numbers, detailed descriptions, names of SS officers involved, locations of facilities, diagrams when possible, and he begged for action. Each report ended the same way. Something must be done. The Allies must bomb the railways, must bomb the camp, must send help. We can rise up if you give us weapons and support. But nothing happened. The trains kept arriving. The murders continued. The Allied response, or lack thereof, was the great tragedy of Pilecki's mission. His reports were received. They were read. They were filed. But they weren't believed. In London, in Washington, intelligence officers read Pilecki's reports and thought he was exaggerating. They thought the numbers were impossible. They thought it was Polish resistance propaganda, designed to draw Allied attention and resources to Poland. How could the Germans be murdering thousands of people per day in gas chambers? It was too monstrous, too organized, too industrial. Surely this was an exaggeration. This was the fatal flaw in the Allied response. They couldn't imagine it, so they didn't believe it. By early 1943, Pilecki realized several things. First, the Gestapo was closing in on ZOW. Several key members had been arrested and executed. The network was compromised. It was only a matter of time before the SS uncovered the entire organization. Second, the Allies were not going to act based on written reports. They thought he was exaggerating. They thought the truth was propaganda. They needed more proof, more witnesses, more evidence. Third, his information was too valuable to lose. If he died in Auschwitz, everything he knew died with him. He needed to escape and make his case in person. The escape plan began in January 1943. Pilecki had been transferred to a work detail at a bakery in Harmagia, about 2 miles from the main camp. The bakery had lighter security because it was outside the main fence perimeter. It supplied bread to the camp and to German military units in the area. Pilecki recruited 2 other prisoners to escape with him, Jan Redzej and Edward Ciesielski. They studied the guard rotations for weeks. They identified the weakest points in security. They planned their route through the countryside. They identified safe houses where the resistance could hide them. On the night of April 26th to 27th, 1943, they executed their plan. First, they cut the telephone and alarm lines, using tools they had stolen and hidden. This prevented the guards from calling for immediate backup when the escape was discovered. Second, they overpowered the night guard, a Ukrainian who was half asleep. They tied him up and gagged him, but didn't kill him. Killing would have triggered an immediate massive manhunt. Leaving him alive bought them time. Third, they used a duplicate key that Redzej, who worked as a locksmith, had made from a wax impression weeks earlier. They unlocked the door and walked out. Then they ran. They had no food except what they'd saved from their meager rations. A few pieces of bread. No maps. No weapons except a knife. They knew the Germans would search everywhere once the escape was discovered in the morning. They moved at night, hiding during the day in forests and barns. They avoided roads and villages where German patrols were common. On the second day, they were nearly caught by a German patrol. They hid in a ditch, barely breathing, as soldiers passed within feet of them. They could hear the Germans talking, joking, complaining about having to search for escaped prisoners. On the third day, Ciesielski's leg became infected from an old wound. He could barely walk. They had to carry him, taking turns supporting his weight. This slowed them down dangerously. On the fourth day, near the village of Alvernia, they encountered a Polish peasant who recognized them as escaped prisoners from their shaved heads and emaciated bodies. Instead of turning them in for the reward money the Germans offered, he fed them, gave them bread and milk, the first real food they'd had in years, and he directed them to a resistance safe house. They had made it out. Pilecki had spent 947 days in Auschwitz, 2 years, 7 months, and 5 days. Prisoner 4859 was free. He immediately wrote a comprehensive report. It was 100 pages long. It detailed everything he had seen: the layout of Auschwitz, the gas chambers, the crematoriums, the process of mass murder, the number of dead, everything. He presented it to the Polish Home Army Command in Warsaw. They thanked him. They filed the report. They did nothing. The British and Americans already knew about Auschwitz from his previous reports. They weren't going to change their strategy. Bombing the railways would divert resources from the strategic bombing campaign. Bombing the camp itself might kill prisoners. Dropping weapons for an uprising was too risky. Pilecki was crushed. He had spent 2.5 years in hell. He had risked everything. He had built a network. He had sent report after report, and nobody would act. But Pilecki didn't give up. When the Warsaw Uprising began on August 1st, 1944, Pilecki immediately volunteered. He fought in the streets of Warsaw for 63 days until the uprising was crushed by overwhelming German force. Over 200,000 civilians were killed. The city was systematically destroyed. He was taken prisoner by the Germans again. This time, he was sent to a POW camp in Germany as a captured soldier, not a concentration camp prisoner. He survived until liberation by Allied forces in May 1945. After the war, Pilecki returned to Poland, expecting to be honored as a hero. Instead, he walked into a different kind of hell. Poland was now under Soviet control. The communist government saw the Home Army veterans as threats. These were men who had fought for a free, independent Poland. The communists wanted obedient citizens, not heroes. Pilecki was arrested by the Communist Secret Police in 1947. He was accused of being a Western spy, of working for British intelligence, of conspiring against the Polish state. He was tortured during interrogation. Methods he had survived in Auschwitz were used against him by fellow Poles. He was beaten, deprived of sleep, forced to stand for days. His interrogators wanted him to confess to crimes he hadn't committed, to implicate other Home Army members. On May 25, 1948, after a show trial where the verdict was predetermined, Witold Pilecki was executed by a shot to the back of the head in Mokotów prison in Warsaw. He was 47 years old. His body was dumped in an unmarked mass grave somewhere in Warsaw. The exact location has never been found. For decades, mentioning his name was forbidden in communist Poland. His story was erased from history. His family was persecuted. His children were denied educational opportunities because of their father's crimes. It wasn't until 1989, after the fall of communism, that his true story could finally be told. So what is the true legacy of Witold Pilecki? What is the ripple effect of his impossible mission? First, intelligence. Pilecki's reports were the first comprehensive eyewitness accounts of what was happening in Auschwitz. Before Pilecki, the Allies had rumors. After Pilecki, they had facts, numbers, details, undeniable evidence. His reports complemented the later Auschwitz protocols, smuggled out by Rudolf Verba and Alfred Wetzler in 1944, and became crucial evidence at the Nuremberg trials. When the world said we didn't know, Pilecki's reports proved they did know. The information was available. The choice was made not to act. Second, resistance. The ZOW network Pilecki built saved lives. Through material support, intelligence sharing, and maintaining morale, ZOW members helped each other survive. The network continued even after Pilecki's escape. Members sabotaged German facilities, copied and smuggled out German records, even assassinated particularly brutal capos and SS men who were murdering prisoners. Third, moral witness. Pilecki proved that even in Auschwitz, even in a place designed to destroy humanity, people could resist, could organize, could maintain their dignity, could fight back. His story demonstrates that no tyranny is so complete that resistance is impossible. Fourth, inspiration. Poland's chief rabbi, Michael Szydryk, wrote, "When God created the human being, God had in mind that we should all be like Captain Witold Pilecki." Historian Norman Davies wrote, "If there was an Allied hero who deserved to be remembered and celebrated, this was a person with few peers." But perhaps the most important legacy is what Pilecki teaches us about moral courage. He walked into Auschwitz knowing he would likely die there. He did it because someone had to bear witness. Someone had to tell the world. Someone had to try. That's how wars are truly won. Not by the armies that follow doctrine, but by the individuals who see the fatal flaw and fix it. The fatal flaw was invisibility. The Nazis counted on the world not knowing, not seeing, not believing. Pilecki's innovation was to become the witness, to walk into hell and document it, to prove it, to make it undeniable. The stupid action was volunteering for Auschwitz when every rational person was trying to avoid it. The crazy result was the most important intelligence-gathering mission of the Holocaust. Reports that confirmed the industrialized murder of millions. Evidence that could not be ignored or denied. This was his piano wire, his field modification. He saw that the world was blind to Auschwitz, so he became its eyes. In 2013, Witold Pilecki was posthumously awarded the Order of the White Eagle, Poland's highest decoration. In 2020, a square in Warsaw was named after him. His name is no longer forbidden. His story is finally being told. But for decades, he was forgotten, erased by the communists, ignored by the West, a hero without recognition. His wife Maria waited for him. When he didn't return after the war, when she learned he had been arrested, she tried everything to save him. She wrote letters. She pleaded with authorities. Nothing worked. She raised their children alone, always hoping he would somehow return. She died in 2002 without ever knowing where her husband was buried. The mass grave has never been found. Witold Pilecki volunteered for Auschwitz. He built a resistance network in hell. He documented the Holocaust from inside. He escaped. He fought in the Warsaw Uprising. He survived the war. And he was executed by the people he had tried to save. But his reports survive. His witness survives. And because of him, the world cannot say it didn't know. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.